This is Unit 1, Lesson 5, the classification of living things. If you're following along in your text, I'm on page 52. The essential question for this lesson is how are organisms classified? By the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe how people sort living things into groups based on shared characteristics. So why do we classify living things? On page 54 in your text. Scientists classify living things based on the characteristics that the living things share. Classification helps scientists answer questions about organisms such as how many kinds of there are there, what are their characteristics, and what are their relationships. So how do scientists know that living things are related? On page 55 in your text. Physical characteristics such as skeletal structure can indicate whether organisms are similar or related. Scientists also study how organisms develop from an egg to an adult to determine if organisms are related. Chemical characteristics can indicate whether organisms are similar or related. Scientists study genetic material such as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid, mutations, and genetic similarities to find relationships among organisms. Proteins and hormones can also show if organisms are related. So how are living things named? On page 56 in your text. Carolus Linnaeus simplified the naming of living things with a two-part scientific name. A species is a group of organisms that are very closely related. Members of the same species can mate and produce fertile offspring. A genus includes similar species. A scientific name always includes the genus name followed by the specific name. The first letter is capitalized. The species name is lowercase. All organisms have a unique two-part scientific name that is either italicized or underlined. So what are the levels of classification? On page 57. Taxonomy is the science of describing, classifying, and naming living things. Scientists use an 8-level system to classify living things. Each level is more specific than the one above it, and it contains fewer kinds of living things. From the most general to the most specific, the levels of classification are: up here we have domain, which we have eukarya, includes all protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Then we have kingdom. The kingdom Animalia includes all animals. Phylum, or plural, phyla, animals in the phylum Chordata have a hollow nerve cord in their backs, and some have a backbone. Then we have class. Animals in the class Mammalia are mammals, have a backbone, and nurse their young. Then the order. Animals in the order Carnivora are mammals that have special teeth for tearing meat. Then we have family. Animals in the family Felidae are cats. They are carnivores that have retractable claws. Then we have genus. Animals in the genus Felis are cats that cannot roar, they only purr. And then we have species. The species Felis domesticus, or the house cat, has unique traits that other members of the genus Felis do not have. Notice we have the genus part of the name and the species part of the name, and it's in italics, with the genus capitalized and the species not capitalized. So what are the 3 domains? On page 58 in your text. Scientists once used a 6-kingdom classification system, but later added the domain. A domain represents the largest differences among organisms in classification. The 3 domains that exist are bacteria, archaea, or archaebacteria, and eukarya. The domain bacteria is made up of prokaryotes, that usually have a cell wall and reproduce by cell division. All bacteria belong to this domain. Bacteria live in almost any environment, soil, water, or even inside the human body. It is important to remember that prokaryotes lack a nucleus. The domain Archaea, or archaebacteria, is made up of prokaryotes. Once again, reminder, prokaryotes do not contain a nucleus, and they differ from bacteria in their genetics and the makeup of their cell walls. Archaea live in harsh environments such as hot springs and thermal vents, where other organisms could not survive. Some archaea are found in the open ocean and soil. The domain eukarya is made up of all eukaryotes. Remember, eukaryotes have cells with a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Some eukaryotes, such as protists and some fungi, are single-celled. Other protists, as well as fungi, plants, and animals, are multicellular. So what are the four kingdoms in Eukarya? On page 60 and 61. Scientists have classified four types of eukarya. Scientists do this by deciding if an organism is unicellular or multicellular, and if it makes its own food, as well as how it reproduces. Members of the kingdom Protista, called protists, are single-celled or simple multicellular organisms such as algae, protozoans, and slime molds. Protists are very diverse, with plant-like, animal-like, or fungus-like characteristics. Some protists reproduce sexually, while others reproduce asexually. Some protists, autotrophs, make their own food. Other protists, heterotrophs, eat other organisms for food. Members of the kingdom Fungi are single-celled or multicellular organisms such as yeast, molds, and mushrooms. Fungi get energy by absorbing materials and have cells with cell walls but no chloroplast. Fungi use digestive juices to break down materials for their food. They reproduce asexually or sexually depending on their type. Kingdom Plantae consists of multicellular organisms that have cell walls, mostly made of cellulose. Plants make food through photosynthesis. They are found on land and in water that light can pass through and cannot move by themselves. Some plants reproduce sexually when pollen from one plant fertilizes another. Some plants reproduce asexually when buds grow into plants. Kingdom Animalia contains multicellular organisms such as birds, fish, reptiles, insects, amphibians, and mammals that lack cell walls. Animals are typically able to move around and have specialized sense organs. They get nutrients by eating other organisms. Most animals reproduce sexually, but a few types of animals reproduce asexually, such as by budding. So how do classification systems change over time? On page 62, millions of organisms are not named. New organisms do not always fit into the existing classification system. Classification continues to change as scientists learn more about living things. So how do branching diagrams show classification relationships? Scientists often use a branching diagram such as a cladogram, which shows relationships among species. Organisms are grouped according to the common characteristics listed on a line. Branches of organisms extend from this line. Organisms on branches above a particular characteristic have that characteristic. Organisms on branches below do not. So here we have flowering plants. They have flowers. Conifers and flowers have seeds. Specialized tissue for moving nutrients is ferns, conifers, and plants, and a life cycle that involves spores and gametes is mosses, ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. A class by themselves on page 63. As scientists find more living things to study, they find that they may not have made enough classifications, or that their classifications may not describe organisms well enough. Some organisms are difficult to classify because they have traits that fall under more than one classification. The sea spider is an arthropod because its body has segments and an exoskeleton. Sea spiders eat by sticking a straw-like structure into sponges and sea slugs and sucking out the juice. No other arthropod eats like this. To account for this strange mouth, scientists must decide if they need to create a new classification or change an existing one. So how can organisms be identified? On page 64. A dichotomous key uses a series of paired statements to identify organisms. Each pair of statements is numbered. Either you choose the statement that best describes the organism, or you're directed to a new pair of statements. This process happens